Welcome to The Whole View. I'm Stacy of Real Everything. Before we get started, a reminder, this podcast is for general educational purposes and is not intended to diagnose, advise, or treat any physical or mental illness. We always recommend that you see a licensed health professional accordingly. This week, we're taking an updated look at a topic we have explored before in order to update the science and also learn more to make the best choices for our own needs. And specifically, since our last fish oil show, I have been seeing so much anti-fish marketing in recent years. I think it started with a Netflix documentary, which we debunked, and I'll put a link in the show notes for you for that. But I want to talk about what is the truth in all of this. Is the harm actually causing problems to the earth? How can we as consumers make sure that we're taking a supplement that's tested for contaminants and not oxidized oils? And does it have the potential to cause more harm than good overall? Or is the science in support of saying fish oil is still recommended and good for your health? So joining me today to talk about all of these things is expert in all things omega-3, Oliver Amdrup-Chamby. Did I say your name correctly? Chamby?
Yeah, you got it right. You got a mix of
Excellent.
Danish and French and everything in there. So it's perfect. Yeah.
So Oliver is CEO of Puori Supplements, and I came to find Puori in a search for quality fish oil. So I'm excited to hear more about your background and what brought you to bring this to market and why it's different. But more than that, I think there's a lot of information that we can help consumers understand that you, as you went down this journey, learned. So can you tell us a little more about yourself and your background that led you to this passion?
Totally. Yeah. And thank you for having me. But I think first off, I'm a consumer. So I felt it was equally confusing to begin with. That's for sure. And like my journey into like health and wellness in general started when I was studying. So I was studying something as interesting as just as international business, but my passion was in health and wellness. So I was always like, I was a personal trainer. I ended up starting a CrossFit gym. It was one of the first CrossFit gym in Europe. Ended up working for CrossFit as their director of Europe and Middle East and Africa. So I spent a lot of time in that regard, built a business around that. But my passion at the time was always around just like preventative health and healthy living and what we saw in the gym. So we became very interested in omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid balance back in like 2008 or 7 or something like that. It was really like probably not the most interesting topic for at that time, like a 20-year-old that was into health and wellness and exploring this. But we found that it was pretty interesting that with the literature we were investigating into, you were seeing a diet that was skewing heavier and heavier on omega-6s generally from what we were seeing of how we're consuming, which is more pro-inflammatory compared to a diet maybe rich in omega-3 fatty acids that are more anti-inflammatory. But we were seeing a lot of people like having different issues, joint issues, different things. So we were just playing around basically as consumers. And then we started working with some doctors and they all had the same kind of message to us, which was pretty interesting, which was the beginning of the brand. And that was for me and my co-founder, Julius. We were telling them that they had one thing. If you start to consume like a fish oil product or something, just make sure it's pure and clean. That was their own, like, because you can have like heavy metals and dioxins and similar in fish oil. So if you start to consume that, make sure it's pure and clean. And we were like, the consumers, that makes sense. How do we measure that? Pure and clean. That must be a data point, parts per million of something like mercury, lead, different things. So we start like going out to the brands and ask, hey, we need a good quality fish oil. What's your parts per billion of mercury in this batch? And they were like, what? We couldn't get any answers. We went to pharmacies, we called like brands up, we wrote emails, went to health stores here. This is back in Denmark, Copenhagen, Denmark, and that area. And we were like, that's pretty interesting that everybody that we were getting advice from, whether it was like, if you read the book, Dr. Barry Sears had written a book, omega-3, a book on omega-3 fatty acids. And he was like, just make sure that this is pure and you can see that you have to avoid these contaminants and so on. So we felt there was something missing. And then at first we thought maybe we can just purchase an existing product, throw it through a lab ourselves, see what it looks like. And then we feel good about taking it ourselves. but also like recommending it in the gym as a personal trainer and so on for other people that were looking for it. And then we, fairly nerdy as we were, like started to dive into it and understand what it was. And one led to the other. And finally we were like, should we sell our apartments and buy a batch of fish oil ourselves? And yeah, that's how Puori got started. So that's the starting point. So it's always about that passion for the environmental toxin side of it. But obviously, the other side, I say there's normally two things you want to be aware of when you talk omega-3 fatty acids or you talk supplementation in general. It is one, you got to have an active ingredient that is evidently based to give you a result, right? Like you got to deliver something because there's no fun in chewing a capsule or swallowing pills in any way. And two, it got to make sure that it's pure, like based on data pure. So you're not like building up contaminants that will store in your body over time or any other things that you might concentrate out of working with natural ingredients and concentrating them. So those were our two key things that we were into, and that's what we wanted to build the brand on.
I think it's fascinating that it started outside of the US because I always talk here about how the supplement industry in the US lacks any sort of regulation. And I always think of Europe as not perfect, but doing much better as it comes to banning ingredients and screening things that are affecting humans. And so there you are still in Europe trying to find heavy metal disclosure and not able to do it. And it is interesting that something that I think we know about at least now, maybe not in 2007 and 8, only us nerds were thinking of those things back
Mhm.
then. But now it is well known by most people that there is contaminants in fish, right? We heard so often as a woman who was pregnant several times, it was like, don't eat too much fish or these kinds of fish because mercury, blah, blah, blah. So we've known it for a long time,
Mhm.
and yet there's not a requirement to test for these things if you're taking a supplement and basically infusing your body with a flood of this to help with inflammation. But then the science was showing also benefits short term, but then potential not benefits long term. And I know I'm going to share the show where we covered a lot of this science later. Listeners, this will be a revisit, but also an update. So we will revisit all of that in the original show. But what really was found is that was because of the oxidation and some of the contaminants that were in the fish oil, right? Like you got the benefit short term, but then long term, as you said, it was building up and causing problems. And so I did want to revisit some of the newer science since that show. And it is important, I think, to remember that while we're talking about supplements, all of this needs to be discussed with a doctor. And I think for me, what brought me to this journey and being passionate about it again was because a doctor was looking at my blood tests and saying, like, hey, you should take a fish oil. And I'm like, I already am taking an omega-3
Mhm.
supplement. Like, and it's
Wow.
not,
Yeah.
and it wasn't helping the way that
No.
it needed to. And so in doing testing, I think it's really important that you will find whether or not the product that you're taking is, to your point, both effective and safe, right? We want
Mhm.
both of those things. So when we're looking at the scientific studies, it's very difficult as just a layperson to know exactly what the quality of these products were. That
Yeah.
said, the science is overwhelming in favor of the benefits of omega-3, right? I was looking at multiple scientific articles. So, for example, in one, there was a randomized controlled trial that found omega-3 supplementation reduced the negative adjuvant therapy side effects, so of breast cancer survivors, but really probably would apply to any cancer. They take a medication after their treatment, which causes negative side effects, and they found that omega-3 supplementation was helping reduce those side effects, which is awesome to see and makes sense to me because it was probably inflammation related. And so we're seeing this offset from omega-3 supplementation. And in 2021, there was a randomized control trial that found omega-3 supplementation improved the levels of several parameters, specifically of COVID-19 patients. So where we think about COVID-19 being a inflammatory trigger in the body, they were able to give people with acute hospitalization strong flood of omega-3s and saw a reduction in inflammation, which is awesome to see that this is something that they're doing in hospitals, right? Like they're not just using prescription
Yes.
medication, but they're also considering things like omega-3s. And we know that they were looking at vitamin D and a bunch of other things in patients who were having negative health effects from COVID-19. And I know from my perspective, I have long haulers and had a really hard time with that. And one of the things that I did was trying to get rid of inflammation was taking
Mhm.
omega-3s, and why I'm working with a doctor who said, maybe you need to take a different one because it's not working. And I'll link to a few others, listeners in the show notes, because we're looking at additional benefits of studies of things like reducing risk of cancer, reducing all-cause mortality by 15 to 18%. These are really strong, serious scientific studies, though it is not a panacea. Like all things in life, there is not a magic pill that you can take to generate complete removal of genetic predisposition, racial disparities, lifestyle choices, lack of movement, smoking, alcohol consumption, right? All these things are going to lead to more negative health outcome. And you can't just take a pill to solve for those things. But I did find what was interesting that in 2021, there was a double blind randomized control trial of over 25,000 people that showed there was no difference in atrial fibrillation with either omega-3 or vitamin D supplementation. I was surprised to see that because there's so much um, positive results as it relates to heart health. But then I was looking at, again, the quality of the supplements and all of those kinds of things. I don't know. I'll put a link in there. But all of that to say is you just can't pop a pill to undo any risk factors for heart or other diseases. Because to fully confuse us on the other side of that, because I was like, this doesn't seem right. Let me keep looking. There was another meta analysis from late 2020 and 2021 with nearly 300,000 combined patients showing cardiovascular disease. And I'm quoting the study here remains the leading cause of death worldwide. Supplementation with EPA and DHA is an effective lifestyle strategy for CVD, heart disease prevention, and the protective effect probably increases with dosage. And another study that said omega-3 reduced cardiovascular mortality and improved cardiovascular outcomes. So, from my perspective, I'm looking at all of these things, and sometimes it's not as straightforward as it seems, right? A doctor's telling us, eat more fish, and then you're pregnant, and they say, don't eat fish. And then you think
Yeah.
it's good for your heart, and then they say it's not good for your heart. So that's why I'm excited to dive into a lot of this today. I'm curious, Oliver, because these are, I guess they're international studies, right? But I know a lot of this is very US based, like what you're seeing as an international business and some of the um, news or science that's coming out in Europe. Does it mirror a lot of the kind of updates that we're seeing here on the US side?
It does. And to your point before, I think there's what we try to look at in our science team, especially, is like the amount of positive studies in a direction. So sometimes one study comes out and point in one direction, and maybe even though it can look on paper like a good randomized trial study and so on, like we're a little hesitant. We're not the first movers on new ingredients or so on. We want to wait actually till we have like a lot of different studies and a lot of different populations and direction pointing in the same direction. So that's our route to doing it. And yeah, we believe more in virtuosity of the ingredients than running with the newest, let's say, hot ingredient and so on. So again, back to the point of we made before, Europe definitely has a strong set of, let's say, authorities in the EFSA and the way that you're allowed to market, the way you're allowed to do certain things. But still, we're not even, and in Denmark, actually, I'll make an extra point to that because Denmark is even more into it than the European regulation. So we actually have our health food authorities they actually come visit us once or twice a year. So they have a supplement unit that stops by our office once, twice a year. And they don't know enough about, let's say, environmental contaminants and so on. That's not really what's on the radar yet. Like, even though we know it will be coming, and we sincerely believe that it will be regulated at some point, it's part of what our brand is actually pushing towards with the Clean Label Project and other nonprofits. But that being said, they come and they go through all our website, every social media channel. How are we marketing? Are we trying to mislead anybody or promising something that we probably shouldn't promise, and so on? So they are way more attentive, and they have a set of rules to follow. So, and we still work with them and try to say, hey, you guys, you got to go one step deeper. Maybe we can get like real actual lab data going. And there is organizations on this side of the ocean as well that are like similar to the Clean Label Project that we're probably also going to talk a little bit about later on, that does these either category studies of a certain area where they say there's higher risk of contamination, or just generally like consumer watchdogs that goes out. And we see that over here as well. And they do a good job also trying to share some data and put some focus on this, because that's what it requires. Because honestly, the issue is unfortunately right now that the brands, they don't really know. And I think that one of the best examples I have is from the Clean Label Project study back in 2018 on protein powders. So a different category. They did 130 plus protein powders in the US, which is a fairly significant kind of portfolio of throwing through chemistry labs and testing for different things. But I thought one remarkable finding was, out of the brands that was like promoting on their label, they had BPA-free product. Like I said, BPA-free. 60% of those brands had BPA in them. My point is not they were trying to mislead people putting something on the label. They probably thought, if we buy BPA-free packaging, fish oil should be BPA-free, right? So let's just write that on the label. So it's unfortunately still more of an education and a level of testing. We believe in the documents we get. And if it's like, this is what the government is requiring us to live up to, that's fine. Why go that next step deeper? And that's what we're trying to put some attention on, because we've seen, and that's also, and even more so, like organizations like the Clean Label Project and some of the consumer councils we have over here as well. Like, that's what they're trying to put some focus on. Like, there is areas of higher risk of contamination. And in my point, again, back to the comment before, it seems so crazy that you say, oh, watch out, you're pregnant to eat fish because it could be contaminated. But then give me the freaking data, right? Like, how do I know if that, like, you can't just say, because like, honestly, general fish and omega-3s are good for you as well in that phase of your life. So it's actually really beneficial. So it's a hard one. I feel it's super hard to control, and it's hard to provide a fixed solution. Supplements, I feel it might be a little easier than, let's say, fresh fish in the counter of a store. But at least you can do something around the areas of fishing and saying, okay, we've tested this area. The average fish looks like this, and thus provide some peace of mind for the consumer at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we recently actually had a guest on who talked about, she was the head of a testing lab and shared a lot about
Citrus Labs, right?
Yeah, the head of the supplement industry's often shady practices, where I would like to agree with you that 60% of those brands didn't intentionally deceive consumers with a BPA label. And yet at the same time, it's not that difficult to test a batch, right? And to
No.
see what is in something. And I think that's where, as a consumer, it becomes, I joke, like, you need a PhD in chemistry and label reading in order to know what you're getting into. And it's just not fair when people are spending a lot of money on supplements. And as you said, it's not enjoyable to take. We're gonna talk about like my avoidance of omega-3 because of just it not being enjoyable. But I wonder, like, what does that testing process look like? Like, I know that you used to do testing differently, and now you do what you call full transparency testing on products, and you partner with, as you mentioned, the Clean Label Project to meet their particular standards. Can you help us understand what some of that stuff means? Like, when we hear a term, break that down for us. What does it actually mean as it comes to testing on supplements?
Yeah, no, it's a tough one. And you probably see like the third party tested or something like that on the label, which again, doesn't really say about how much or of what or so on. Many times when I see brands doing it, is they're doing one test on something and that might not be really be the one. So in general, um, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to make it super easy anyway. So it's still going to be a little confusing, but I'll try my best. In general, like on, let's take fish oil. Now we're talking omega-3 fatty acids. There is the contaminant side of it, whether it's the types of contaminants we find in the oceans that can be added through the production facility, all of these different things. So I think the goal is to move from, most brands do like a certificate of analysis and like a small test in the first kind of raw material that they get access to. But then there's a processing. There's like in fish oil, you want to make sure, like back to your story of how not all fish oils are very pleasant. It's often because of oxidation. And that oxidation doesn't necessarily just come from the fish. It comes from how that fish and the fish oil was treated all the way through the supply chain until it ended in that capsule, where you want to minimize the amount of oxygen exposure. That's a data point at one point. So you can actually measure. And back to my comment on environmental contaminants is that data point should be measured in the finished goods, like in the final consumer product. And that's what we have with like the Clean Label project. And we also work with IFA's International Fish Oil Standards on that specific product. But testing finished goods is where also we, unfortunately, sometimes learn something as manufacturers. And there's an array of different things that you want to test for. And that's where I don't want to make it too complicated, but there's the thing we find in nature, there's the man-made chemicals, and there's all the stuff that runs through processing, basically. Those are the things. But again, it's actually, it can be fairly easy for the consumer because if the brand tests for all of this in the final product, if they use something like the Transparency Project with Clean Label Project, they have that credibility or that data point that they can go in and look. And you can see there's an actual set of measurements on every single analyte that they're testing. And then there's the actual sample of what's that show. And I don't believe, and I can tell you from the data of our QR codes, because we have QR codes on every single batch of every single product, and it's not a lot that's scanning them. But when you do scan them, and like, let's say the people that might are influential in your life scan them, it could be the doctor, the personal trainer, the nutritionist, like anybody that are interested in it, they find this data and they talk about, they actually see, this is really powerful. It's creating that foundation of transparency and trust, basically. So that's where we want third-party testing to go. And eventually, we don't want the Clean Label Project to do it. We want it to be regulated by the government, just like there's other things that you need to follow. So it's not, as you said, it is like, if we just start with the high risk of contamination, let's say we're now going into all the details and trying to look for what are all the different things that come, because we want to map it out. We want to understand the areas of the world of whether we're sourcing peas or fish or soil, even like where is it purest? Like, what are we seeing in that area? But if we just go back to it, like for fish, let's start with like the things we do know, like the heavy metals. Like that'll be a very good starting point. Maybe PCBs and dioxins, something like that, a group of chemicals, basically. If we start at that, it's a really good starting point. And then oxidation, that's quality perspective of the oil. Is it fresh? But to your point, sometimes when we test oils, they're like, they're rancid. And sometimes you don't even need a lab. You can just tune a capsule. And if it really is horrible, fishy, then there's a good chance that it is rancid, right? And it's already, but the reason why I say it's a good indication, it's not the 100% fix, because some brands are using a lot of things to hide it. And we're also seeing, we saw a tendency suddenly to coat capsules. So you didn't dissolve as fast, you dissolve all the way down in intestines instead. So you didn't have the same fish burn. But like, really, like, do I want to eat nail polish every single day on that capsule? No, I don't, right? So a good way is to chew a capsule, actually. Have food nearby, because it's like with any oil, like if you take a spoon of olive oil as well, it can be really harsh in your throat, right? And the same with fish oil can. So, but if you chew it and you feel, and I can eat some food right after and the taste disappears, it often isn't rancid. So it gotta remove quickly, because that's how our own sensory was made. Like we wouldn't go to a sushi restaurant and eat like super smelly fish on our plate or super rancid tasting fish. We wouldn't, right? And the same could be said about the fish oil, if it's not too diluted with different things in it to make it less.
I think it's interesting, as people who are educated on this, it might seem obvious to us to what an oxidized oil smells like or looks like, right? But to listeners, if anything ever seems off, it is not worth trying to find out by consuming whatever it is, right?
No,
Like,
no.
just like you said, if I go to like a sushi place, or if I like to get oysters when I travel because I like the zinc, and if it comes and it's something's off, I'm like,
Yeah,
nope, not
no,
worth it. I don't want to get sick when I'm traveling,
don't
right?
do it. Yeah,
So if oils seem cloudy, if they seem stinky, if just anything seems not right, it probably isn't. Like, listen to your instincts. Your biology has evolved to tell you, oh, this doesn't seem right. Because if you were in the wild, you would need to be careful with that stuff. So do the same thing. Even though you might have bought something, like, reach out to that brand and return it. If you're like, you know what, I took 3 of these pills and I had some weird fish burps and the oil seems cloudy, return it, like, because
yes,
they need to also be aware that they're selling a product that is not performing the way that they want it to perform. Because I would like to think that brands do have an interest in having someone feel good about their
yeah,
product as a result, right? Like, I'm going to continue to take a product when I see results from it. So I'm going to keep buying that brand. So there is a vested interest from that perspective for a brand to do right. I think I am curious to know, to hear you say that the oxidation increases likelihood of fish oil burps. So a little side about me, I don't have a gallbladder. Years and years
mhm,
ago, before my health journey, still eating gluten, lost my gallbladder, not lost it. I know where it went. And so I have a really difficult time digesting foods in the morning because I don't have, like everybody else, stomach acid built up overnight. And I have to ease into what I consume in the morning to let my stomach acid come back. And taking supplements in the morning is a nightmare for me
yeah,
because my body is like immediately flooded with things. And it's like, whoa, we're not ready for that. Was shocked. I'm not kidding you, and I know that you represent the brand. This is not me sucking up to you. I was shocked that I have, like, both the omega-3 separate and the like, a packet that is made by Puori that has, like, I don't even remember. I think it's vitamin D and magnesium as well as omega-3.
it's spot on. Yeah,
I took both of those in the morning on an empty stomach and had 0 issues. No fish oil burps, no digestive issues. Now, I try not to do that regularly, right? I try to
mhm,
have breakfast and then go back and take them. But if I'm like going to have a busy day, I'm not going to be home, I'm going to do whatever, then I'll take them. I why? Help me understand, like, why is it not bothering me and everything else does? Because I truly was like, this is I have taken so many different fish oils. I'm so many different, and I don't understand. So it is what I'm understanding that is partially because all of the other ones had some sort of oxidation.
like obviously I can't talk for all, but I
Yeah.
think one of the key things is that it has such a low total oxidation number to it. And that number that we test again is in the final product, the product you test, which are very different from the numbers we get from some brands. And like when they have the crude oil, like that's the stuff they put up on the website, because the process from actually distilling and capsulation and packaging and so on, that's where it often goes wrong. So obviously you got to start the highest quality of fish possible. And the fishery we use actually do the first press on the boat. Like they keep them either fresh and alive until they press it, or they do it on a boat. So it's a very, like they want to minimize the opportunity of oxygen getting into that product. Then yeah, through the process, especially of capsulation, you got to be really certain. And that's why, again, if you test, we always test. And sometimes we've also seen some batches of product that didn't have really good numbers. But again, since we do the transparency project and test every single batch of every single product at the end of the journey, as it come picked off our warehouse as well, we also have a little bit of of freight then into the equation, because that's actually one of the things we are struggling with sometimes is like shipping to, let's say, Texas in a hot summer month, and the UPS maybe leave it outside, and even though it's packed so it doesn't get sunlight, it can still get really warm, right? So there's obviously things you could do about that. We're playing a little bit with different things, but if you think about that, there's so many opportunities for it to go wrong along the road. And if most people don't test at the end of the journey of that product, if it is actually fresh, then like my certainty is when we work with contract manufacturers, so on, there's no way to hide. There's no, like, it's the end product, which we're not relying on their data. So they got to deliver. And we have set some goals where we want to go to in these numbers, and these numbers goes up pretty quickly. So I think like oxidation is a really high increase curve when you get into it. Also why liquid fish oil is really hard to do. And another story, because obviously when you open it at home, you get oxygen into to the oil. So it might be easier to pack the first oil. If you're consuming this over 30 days, the chance is that the oxidation level has like quadrupled at least over that period of time, which is like where it starts to get unstable. Or you need to really drink it quickly to not avoid that. That's a separate line. So I think it's really, again, it's coming back to virtuosity along the way of minimizing oxygen exposure, starting with the highest quality fish possible. We go with the smallest fish we can't possibly source, like anchovies, sardines, and so on. And then from there on, it's how good are the different manufacturers out there to actually deliver that fresh oil at the end of the line. That's what we're looking at.
I could not help but when you said, like, swig the fish oil back quickly, like, literal body shivers. I think I'm gonna be realistic, like, as much as there are things that I know will improve my health, sometimes
Hmm.
just like, "Nope, that's not worth it," right? That's a decision that I am choosing to avoid, and taking straight fish oil from a bottle is, one of those areas where I'm gonna draw a line. I I also have a son who's neurodivergent, whose pediatrician recommended that he take omega-3 supplementation, and it was impossible to find one that was both high quality as that he was willing to take because
Hmm.
it's gross, right? And as a
Hmm.
child, like,
Oh,
he would describe a fish oil burp for me. He didn't know that's what it was called, but he would be like, "I don't like the way my mouth feels after I take this." I'd be like, "Okay." So then he didn't wanna take it anymore, and really, something is only as good as your willingness to want to participate in it, to be
it,
consistent with it. And if it is doctor recommended, like, then it is even more important to find that path. And for us, both myself and my son who had these recommendations, like, we ended up just not taking them consistently
hmm,
because we couldn't find
yeah.
one that worked. So I think when we think about kind of doctor recommended, and we've been talking a lot about omega-3s versus fish oil, like, are they the same thing? What are they different? And why is it even recommended for health? So we've talked about it being anti-inflammatory, but I think being able to talk about the performance that you mentioned when it comes to specifically DHA, EPA, and ALA, that can be pretty confusing for people. I
Hmm.
think as mothers, we're familiar with DHA and EPA because they talk about it being really important for our babies to consume. And if you're using formula, right, it's on there, different things like that. But I'm curious how it plays into as adults, as teenagers, as whatever might be recommended or you're looking to take for yourself, how does fish oil versus omega-3 factor into that decision?
I think to start just explaining the like fish oil is an omega-3, but there's different types of omega-3s. So there's the long form, long chain omega-3 fatty acids. That's often the one that comes from animal, and fish is by far the one that has the most if you look at it per the gram of fat. And then there's the short form, which is the ALAs that comes from plants, often the walnuts, the flax seeds, and so on. So the short form, unfortunately, and the literature here is a little bit pointing in different directions, but in general, like it's harder to convert that into your body to something your body can readily absorb. So it has to be actually converted into EPAs and long forms for the body to really absorb it. So again, if you look at in the amount you need to take in from plant is often higher and it's harder to convert. So that's one thing. That's why the fish oil is just a powerful way. The dream is that we could get like several days a week wild caught fish from the ocean, fatty fish that has a high amount to get that potent dose. I'm thinking 2 grams of omega-3 fatty acids a day, maybe even 4, some saying in time. So it's a fairly high dose. And even if you had like another route that you're hearing more and more is that, oh, there's omega-3 in grass-fed beef as well. And that's true. there is definitely, and I'm a firm believer that wild and grass fed and so on is superior. Also, when you look at the data compared to very farm beef compared to it, because again of the ratios of omega 3s versus omega 6, but the amount you're still getting, even in a super healthy wild living cow, let's say that is walking around and you get like a steak from that, it's just really low compared to fish. So if you want that higher dose, that's where fish oil is probably superior. And when we also look at it, we're so interested in, let's say, algae oils and so on, and see other things you can play with where you can get this type of oil in it. And right now, it's more the term, and I think that will change over the next maybe 10 years, but the amount of algae oil you can get for the price to get like a potent dose of EPA, DHA is still, it becomes really expensive. So that will change as we get better at doing that. And that means for us as a brand, we would totally say, okay, if that's the case, we get big quality product that's fresh and all the same kind of metrics that is pure, we would definitely go in that route too. If it were really, let's say, more sustainable and better for the planet, better for us as human beings. And again, at the price point, if you wanted 2 to 4 grams of omega-3 fatty acids from a supplement, it would be really pricey, and you would actually have to cut out the quite big portion of your allowance if you wanted to go algae route in that way. So that's where fish oil again still have that benefit on the long form EPA, DHA, especially.
I think it's interesting that you say in an ideal world, we would be getting this fish several times a day. I think back to ancestry a lot. I'm a geek
Hmm.
that way, right? I think about how we've evolved. I think about epigenetics and
Hmm.
what our ancestors passed down to us based on what their habits were. And I for sure know that whatever my ancestors did, wherever they lived, there was a lot of fish. Like there,
Hmm.
I just, because I feel good when I eat a lot of fish. And I will also say for people who menstruate, like as a woman who, when I am premenstrual, I crave sushi. And
Hmm.
I did some research, like, I don't know, a couple of years ago when I realized that this was a craving that I was having every time I was premenstrual. And I was like, oh, it's the anti inflammatory properties of the fish, and the sushi wrapper is seaweed, right? It's a type of algae. And it's giving me iron, it's giving me anti-inflammatory omega-3s. It's giving me things that my body wants, knowing that it's going to be going through a phase that is more difficult. And so it's interesting to me to think about that from like a womanhood perspective,
Hmm.
but also in some of the research that I was looking at, it's saying that women specifically have a harder time converting ALA, which, as you mentioned, is the shorter chain that we would be getting from plants. So I see a lot of people saying like add flax seed, add flax oil, which is often oxidized as well,
Hmm.
hemp, walnut, different kinds of things, right? Add that to a smoothie or eat more of these things to get more benefit of ALA. The problem is from the research that I was seeing is that oftentimes women's bodies have a harder time converting that ALA to DHA. So I'm wondering, like, is
Hmm.
it possible to truly be a modern day person who menstruates, whatever that looks like, right? And get enough EPA and DHA without fish or without supplementation. It's just interesting to me to think, I wonder if we really can in the modern day and age.
I, I agree with you. And I think there's a big difference in here is what is, how do you survive and what is optimal? Because one thing is, yes, we might be able to survive for the minimal amount of omega-3 we're getting from other stuff. But if it's so far from optimal, that's what, let's say, science and the new days we should bring back to the old way of living and thinking back. Because I'm very similar, I think, in mindset like you. I sincerely believe in those things. And we sincerely, like everybody in our companies will still believe in food. Food is where you should get the vast majority of all your nutrients. Food supplements is a supplement to your diet. And then there's things you can optimize because, yeah, it might actually be really hard to get. If you want, you might need I don't know if I'm getting the conversions right, but let's say 100 to 200 grams of salmon a day, which is a fatty fish, to get the amount of omega-3 there's in a serving of pure fish oil. That's quite a lot of salmon. It can both be expensive, but it could also be polluted. And we don't know where it comes from. And is it farmed? How much is actually fresh? And so on. So with the modern world, we say you got to vary your diet basically when we don't have the data. You got to eat a lot of different things and so on. So the things you do on a daily basis, where it's really just that enhancer to the diet, the omega-3, the vitamin D, yes, we could probably get it through. It's actually really hard to get vitamin D enough in the winter for us. And I'm speaking from example and from a childhood of being deficient without knowing it later on in life, finding out that was probably one of the main reasons I always got sick during the winters. It was so easy. We found that out later on. That's a different story. And not going to go too far down, but it's really hard. You got to eat so many egg yolks and mushrooms and plants and so on. It's hard to get that unless you get real sunlight. So we can optimize, and we should use supplements for that, obviously, to optimize our health and get to the peak performance. And then I think on that note, on optimization, the future involves way more testing of us as individuals. Because as you say, you did your blood work and so on and found out that hey, your doctor saying you're actually a little low here. It would be optimal for you to get to a high dose. That's what the future should look like. I'm a firm believer in like toilets that will analyze the different vitamin contents and so on. And your blood testing, what is your fatty acid profile look like? The hair testing of contaminants that are building up in your body, like it's data points. We're very educated species. We're moving forward, but with some of the preventive health, we're still so far back compared to the data points we could apply to at least minimize like exposures. And I want to just touch on one thing, which I think is so interesting when we talk about health and preventative health in general, is that overall, in my opinion, at least in what I've experienced, is everybody disagree on what's the perfect route, like in terms of nutrition. It's not like keto, vegan, paleo. Like there's so many different routes, and they work for different people. They work for different different parts of your journey, and they will just work differently. But there's no one size fit all. But every single scientist in food and health and wellness will say little amount of heavy metals is not that good. A lot of it is really bad. So it's like we just gotta be exposed to it as little as possible. That's kind of it. You've seen over the years how we've actually set down the lower threshold of what is considered toxic for us. We've seen that has gone down like every 10 years, it's going down a few points. So there's no route in like a little is not okay, right? Like we should go as close to zero as we can without getting people scared, but let's be aware. Like, let's be the consumers that ask questions. Ask about your favorite product that you're consuming on a daily basis. What's the heavy metal contaminant status of I'm saying your dark chocolate, because that's one of mine that I have a dream that Clean Label Project soon will test all the dark chocolates out there. So at least I know. And yeah, so that
I
many.
actually did a dark chocolate show.
You did. And you
I
actually did on heavy metals as well, which I thought
yes.
was really interesting. When I heard it the first, so this is a real story. I was
I'm
sitting
like,
in
you
my,
actually listened to the show.
I was sitting in my sauna, trying to detox a little bit from sweating, and very fortunate enough to be able to do that. I was sitting at night and I was listening to that episode, and I was like actually a little excited because of the way that you were talking about, like the good properties of the dark chocolate might actually balance out the bad properties, and which, or at least outweigh in general, which I say hooray. So I was a little more comfortable in consuming my dark chocolate at night again. But on the other hand, when we did the measurements of my hair and all the different ways of like looking at, we could still see I'm building up cadmium in my body. So, even though it might be able to, as an overall, it's better to take it and not to take it, like eat dark chocolate, not to eat it. And I still want to go closer to as zero as possible. And as a brand that we have a dark chocolate flavored protein powder, and we have been through so many different cacao producers that I think, the third party manufacturer we work with think we're a little bit crazy because it's almost impossible to consistently source that clean. It is so hard to find something, even from the same organic farms that you're getting it from, and so on. And again, organic actually doesn't say anything about heavy metals. We got to have that in mind as well. So if we're looking at heavy metals here, organic is not your solution. It works for pesticides for sure. And animal health, there's like go for organic for hooray. But I think from in heavy metals perspective, I still want to like have Clean Label Project or someone else like doing this kind of same testing so I can feel even more comfortable as a consumer consuming it on a daily basis. But yeah, no, I enjoyed that episode too. And my chocolate intake increased after that episode. So yeah. So
Well,
thank you.
I think it's interesting. It wouldn't have occurred to me. First of all, I love your protein powder. It is like your omega-3 oil, the only whey protein that I've been able to take that doesn't cause issues for me. And I don't take it every day because I do think that, like, someone who has a dairy sensitivity, that just doesn't feel like I'm doing best for my body, but to be able to have a solution for sometimes and also for the kids to,
Mhm.
like, I know that if it's less bothersome for me, that it's gonna be better for them, so that's great. It wouldn't have occurred to me that testing needed to be done on the cacao powder, so I love that you're doing that, and I love also that you said organic doesn't address heavy metals, because I try to explain this to people all the time with the word natural is another one of
Mhm.
those where brands will really lean in on some of these words that consumers have learned mean better for me, like organic or natural. But the problem is that heavy metals are part of the earth. Heavy metals are natural. Heavy metals are organic. Asbestos is natural. Asbestos is organic. I don't want those things in my food. I don't
No,
want snake venom in my food. I don't want poison ivy in my food. I don't
no.
want, like, none of those things. And so it's so frustrating to see brands use these marketing terms in a way that really is manipulative to consumers because I don't know whether they know or they don't know that these things are problematic, or they're just turning a blind eye or whatever it might be. But I think the example that you gave of, like, the 60% of people having BPA in their bottle, all the examples of the chocolates that were tested, and so many of them were within a certain range of either being problematic or not problematic, so that at least we can make better choices while we're enjoying the antioxidant benefits of our dark
Mhm.
chocolate, choosing a brand that is doing like you're trying to do and source from chocolate that soil is not rich in heavy metals, not absorbing some of that, whether it's in the air, whatever it might be. So it it is so much work. And it's why I think, as you said, the government just has to start doing some regulation, because a lot of these brands don't understand or aren't willing to do all this navigating themselves, and might think that they're doing the right thing, but then learn later that at the end testing, their product isn't BPA free. And at that point, like, aren't willing to throw away that investment and just put it on the shelf anyway. And if we don't have some sort of regulatory body standardizing what is actually beneficial and healthy and safe for consumers, brands are going to make decisions that ultimately help their bottom line. And
Mhm.
yes, if it's performance and a customer comes back and buys it over and over again, that's going to help their bottom line. And so if I were a brand focused mostly on my bottom line, I would be thinking, is the consumer going to be aware that the problem is there or not? Not, I want to remove like, I want to eliminate whatever the problem is, but more, are they gonna be aware that my product is causing a problem?
Mhm.
And that's where we're seeing in the States, probably more so in Europe, a lot of these lawsuits coming out now of people who have been using personal care products or supplements or different kinds of things and finding that they have long-term negative health effects from the contamination and from
Yeah.
these kinds of things that have caused cancer or caused these different kinds of things. And it's heartbreaking, and I can only hope that is leading to some sort of change, because it's currently in the States, we have basically no regulation on supplements. It's a
No.
nightmare.
But it has to. I've I think we've been way too optimistic in our time frame horizon in the past and said, in 3 years, everybody will be doing this. And that's not happening. But it is coming, and consumers are better, and we're better equipped also to ask questions. We're better to actually do a little uproar here and there through social media, through some of the platforms that we have access to, ask the questions. And luckily we are seeing more platforms that are trying to be consumer advocates, to whether it's the EWG, the Clean Label Project, the different platforms that are really doing what they can to provide some transparency and quality assurance for us. But yeah, it's going to take some time. But I'm a firm believer we're not done until food supplement is regulated based on the high risk of contamination, contaminants that could be in that certain product is actually something you have to do. That's when we feel we did it. We made some waves. And we're trying now to show how you can do it. We've also had issues. We've also had to remove products. We've had to go back and fight with suppliers. We've had to fight with the raw ingredients where we were getting, buying organic products, finding pesticides in our product, and so on. And it's worth the battle, I think, because I think from our perspective, what we also see is when a consumer actually understands that and like that, if they really start to enjoy the brands from a business perspective, there's a better repeat purchase on a customer who has a good experience and really feel they trust the brand and so on. So even though it might be harder and more expensive out the gate, I believe in the long-term route of it. So that's really Puori stands for pure origin. Like we are here to provide that safety or like the trust that it requires. And we want to push as many people in that direction as we can. And other brands do the same. So we're excited when we see other supplement brands out there doing it, like so we can benchmark up against each other. Yeah. That's that's what it should be all about.
Absolutely. And I think with those changes, it can also make it more accessible for more people. Because I think what's difficult
Exactly.
about high quality supplements is they're just not accessible for everybody. And if we had, for example, a standard of heavy metal limitation on anchovies and sardines and canned tuna at the
Mhm.
market, people could be getting their omega-3 from more affordable sources naturally.
And to, if I may make a point to that is, I think what is really interesting, it is not always the most expensive that is the purest.
Mm.
That's back to the data point. So sometimes I really want to like debunk myth a little bit if it's possible, right? But like I also feel like now we're talking ingredients and we're buying our ingredients in Europe and the US basically. But let's say that India or China or any other that sometimes get a really bad rep for like purity. What if they're actually are more pure? Because based on data, we should find the areas around the world where it's purest. So we don't say, yeah, oh, everything that comes from there, that's really polluted and so on. There's definitely a reason why we're thinking that way. But again, it's like, it's not very scientific. So if we could do something that would really make other areas thrive, hopefully, and we would be able to use the earth resources a little bit better. So yeah,
I love that. And listeners, I want to bridge you back to science, back to our original show with lots more science. But first, I want to run through the list of ongoing research as of January 2023, why fish oil is so beneficial. So hopefully, we've covered a lot of different grounds and updates beyond the original show, which will cover more science in depth for you here. But as of this year, there are ongoing investigations looking at the significance of omega-3 fatty acids and their promising role. This is a quotation from National Institutes of Health and different kinds of places looking at the promising role in the treatment of conditions and ailments in, it's a long list, so get ready, cardiovascular disease, hypertriglyceride demia is what they call it, but really that means cholesterol issues, type 2 diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, visual and neurological, as well as brain development, maternal health, child health, conditions benefiting prebiotics, heart failure, intervertebral disc degeneration, which that's going to be bone loss and spine, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which you heard me mention, maternal depression, menopausal and night sweats specifically, rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, periodontal disease, epilepsy, diabetic side effects, and the efficacy and tolerability of side effects from chemotherapy, as well as PMS and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So as a reminder, that list was all of the research that is currently being studied that shows significance in omega-3s as being promising in the treatment of those things. And what I will say is that unlike other medical prescriptions and things that might come from some of, if you're taking a quality supplement and not getting fish oil burps, not going to have those negative side effects the way that some of the other medication would to reduce inflammation. Like, for example, an NSAID having potential negative effects on gut health or something like that. So I want to remind you that all of this is we do the best that we can with the knowledge that we have at the time. It's not intended to remind us that we've made a choice in the past that now we have shame or guilt about, or like, oh gosh, I took a brand of fish oil for years that gave me fish oil burps. What damage did I do to my body? Like, none of that, right? We're learning together because I'm in the same boat and doing the best that we can with the information that we have and then going forward and doing better. So I hope that you feel more educated from diving into some of this stuff. And before I link you back to our time warp in the past, Oliver, I know that you want to encourage our listeners to try Puori and hook them up with a deal because the best products aren't always the cheapest products, but we want people to be able to try your product as many as can. And I was on your site yesterday, actually, and I saw that currently you're donating a portion of your profits towards the Clean Label Project as well, which I love to see this November. Was there a link or a code or something listeners can do if they want to try any of Puori's products?
Yeah, so definitely use the whole view code that you have. That will work all across, also during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and so on. And like the whole idea from like coming back to that campaign that we've done, we've actually every year we try to say, okay, let's use some of the proceeds to donate something that makes sense around what we're trying to do, whether it's cleaning up soil or Clean Label Project able to do maybe a chocolate study one day or something similar. Yeah, but just basically getting there's still a discount, so you can try it, but without going into the craziness of it, we want to like see if we can also do a little good in the same time because we do see a lot of people coming on board in this next November is a big month in D2C businesses in general. Then we normally see like December's are quiet, we get into Christmas mode, and then January we get people like coming back in to look more at their health and so on. But yeah, so definitely go use Puori.com. It's Puori.com. And it's a contraction of pure origin. So it's basically saying it got to start with pure origin, all the different ingredients we're using. So it's a little bit reminder of that. And then it's slash whole view. So that's it. And you can use whole view. You can go to the site. You can just use whole view at checkout, and that will give you a decent discount and give you hopefully an opportunity to try the products and let us know, like sincerely, let us know what you like, what you don't like. We get some of the best feedback and also product ideas from our consumers. We actually have made this into now an ongoing thing. So we have like a customer survey we send out to our audience, to our email database every quarter-ish. And we get so much good interesting knowledge. And we let them also vote products up and say, is there a product we're going to focus on next? And then we look at it. Can we make this product pure and with high quality active ingredients? It's a way for us to be different. Then try to see if we can make it. So interesting things are coming that way. And we're learning so much from our users as well that are growing. And again, we're a Danish brand. We're European based. That's where we started. We're really trying to get this purity push, transparency push in and build a long lasting setup here in the US as well. And hopefully, help a lot of people with things that they're using on a daily basis again and again and feel comfortable and safe about it. Like I use myself as an example in my family. I've been consuming fish oil now since I started probably before we had our own product, but I've been consuming it since 2009, our own product. If we had high amounts of something in our product, I would be damn polluted myself because we're talking on a daily basis. I've been able to work with my blood and adjusted my dosage. I've had really high doses. I've had, more maintenance doses, but I've consistently been taking it for a very long time. So that's why we do it. We want people to feel comfortable with the things that they consistently consume. So
I appreciate that about the brand. I know you also do collagen, which is something listeners are constantly asking for a good source of. So listeners definitely check them out at puori.com/whole view. And just to confirm, I think normally the site-wide code is 20% off, but in November, it's 25% off on your site. So listeners, you're not going to get like a worse deal using the code if you're partaking in some
it
of
might
the
actually, yeah,
November sales benefits. I just want to thank you so much for being here. We always appreciate your willingness to be open to growth and through your own personal change because no one is perfect, but in listening, learning, and unlearning, we can choose to become better versions of ourselves for ourselves. Thanks for listening.